Of course I love my husband. But Brandon's fascination with aliens can get on my nerves. I'm patient with him when the topic about alien abduction comes up. He is a great guy. But he's a little obsessed with beings from outer space and his theories on why they abduct humans. I'm not even sure I believe in aliens. But then again, I go to church every Sunday, so I respect his beliefs. He has all sorts of movies on aliens. Let's see, we have Aliens with Sigourney Weaver, Predator, E.T., The Thing. I absolutely loved Keith David in that movie. And the list continues. They Live with Roddy Piper, V, the TV series, War of the Worlds, Close Encounters, and much more. But they're in crates in our garage. I'm a sci-fi girl myself. One of my favorites is Signs, starring Mel Gibson. It tied in both elements of God and aliens nicely when a pastor who loses his faith finds it again during an alien invasion. It was deep on so many levels. Brandon's been like this ever since I met him. But aside from his fascination for the extraterrestrial, he is a wonderful man. I have to explain this so you'll understand. My husband swears by this, and I don't dare make fun of him. But he says he was abducted by aliens. It happened to him when he was 11 years old. Now, I'm not a body language expert, but when he talks about it, you can tell he believes it with every fiber of his being. I believe something terrible happened to him. And I think it was so traumatic that he has repressed memories about it. The mind is remarkable, and it will do anything to protect itself from reality. What he told me was incredible. The seriousness in his eyes and face kept me entranced. His account of the whole situation was chilling. He told me he was visiting his grandfather in New Hampshire. He has a farm out there. He said he went swimming at Lake Quannapowitt with his best friend George. They were out there for hours goofing off. After swimming, they planned on camping outside in a tent that they pitched a few yards from his grandfather's house. Grandpa Charlie left the back door open for them in case they wanted to come inside sometime during the night. It was starting to get dark when they decided to head back to the house. The old man fixed them dinner, and they were off to head into the tent. They built a fire the way his grandfather taught him, so they could roast marshmallows for s'mores. They told jokes they thought were naughty, and finally went into the tent. It was a warm night, so they didn't even bother to get into their sleeping bags. They both had flashlights to read comic books before they went to sleep. For a little ambiance, George brought his transistor radio and turned it to Kiss 108 FM. After a little while, they turned off their flashlights, turned off the radio to get some sleep. They couldn't wait for Grandpa Charlie to take them to the fair the next day. They both fell asleep when Brandon said the radio woke him up. "George, turn off the radio, I'm trying to sleep." But he said George didn't answer him. He reached over to get his attention, but he wasn't there. Brandon thought maybe he went into the house to use the bathroom. Then he heard George outside of the tent whispering his name. "Brandon." husband said he sat up and went to go see what George wanted. He saw George standing there looking up at the sky. "What's wrong?" "Shh!" George hushed him. "Listen, do you hear that?" "Hear what?" "Listen!" They stood there for a moment until Brandon could hear it. They both looked at each other. George pointed upwards. "It sounds like it's coming from the sky." Brandon looked up. They stood there trying to decide what it was. It didn't sound like a plane or a helicopter. It had a very low sound. "I know you heard that." "Yeah, what is that?" They kept their eyes transfixed, staring up at the stars over the trees as the sound got louder. Brandon's grandfather could hear it too. He came outside to ask them what was going on. He walked across the front yard to see what they were looking at. "Boys, what are you doing out here? What's that noise?" The closer it got, the stronger the vibration. They could feel it under their feet and all around them. Boys, let's get inside. Come on." He was practically dragging them away. They wanted to see what it was. Brandon was so scared he took off running towards the house. He said he must have tripped over a stone because he fell onto the ground, then felt the vibration getting stronger all around him. He said it felt as though it was crushing him. In the distance, he could hear his grandfather yelling. His stomach lurched, and the feeling of weightlessness came over him. He said he was screaming, but it sounded as though his screams were muffled. He could hear George screaming too. Brandon says he woke up to grayish beings standing all around him. He was lying there powerless. He was totally paralyzed. What he was laying on was cold and hard. He said they used sharp objects to prick him. Brandon could feel everything they were doing to him. A gray was staring down at him as the others continued their examination. Thoughts, not his own, were rushing to his head. This is where nothing makes sense. I understand how almost every species reproduces, but Brandon told me the Greys can't. If that's the case, then how did they come to be? Where did they come from? If I had to guess, I have to say they aren't what we think they are. Ever notice how these abductions are never pleasant? Many people have compared it to torture, with a feeling of hopelessness. Supposedly, the government has made contact, so why don't they simply tell us? That's where I have the issue. These life forms are supposed to be more advanced than humans, right? but somehow they can't reproduce? It doesn't make sense to me. My husband said they were genderless looking creatures. Some say they were tall. Others say they're short. But one thing is for sure. They are gray in color, have tiny slits for mouths, and big black eyes. Brendan told me that they're fascinated by our planet. They've been studying us for thousands of years. Really, I don't know what to think. He said while he was up there, he realized they took George and his grandfather. The gray standing next to him somehow conveyed that feeling to him. He said they don't communicate telepathically, but through feelings. He said that the Greys have come close but are still unable to produce life. Many men and women allege being implanted with tiny devices. He said it has a lot to do with studying how men and women procreate. Of course, Brendan said they implanted tiny devices in all three of them, and that with this implantation, once they impregnate a woman, then they would be successful. Their plan was to procreate using the implants and using our bodies as the host for their offspring. I still don't get how these beings came to be. That's one of the reasons why he initially didn't want to have children. Once they were done, the Greys sent them back. They were lying face up on the front lawn, and it was still dark. The loud noise and vibrations faded. Brendan's grandfather was in a daze. He stood to his feet and spoke in a monotone. "Y'all go back to bed now. I'm going back inside. See you in the morning, boys." Charlie left the kids just standing outside. They were too scared to go back to sleep in the tent. They were in the living room. George began to whine about being so tired and fell asleep on the couch. Brendan said he didn't want to forget what happened, so he went up to his room and found a notebook to write it all down. I guess that helped because, unlike Charlie and George, he remembered everything. The next day, his grandfather and best friend didn't remember a thing. Well, at least, that's what my husband says. Listen, Brandon and I have gone through a lot, and it took several years of therapy for him to heal. Crazy, right? And after going through all of that, we're expecting our first baby. My obstetrician says she can't tell whether we're having a boy or girl. At every ultrasound, this little one is always moving around. But whatever sex the baby is, we don't care. As long as the baby is healthy. Brandon?